I welcome you to our hot topic today. Today we will be talking about drug offenders and how they should be dealt with in the justice system. Much imprisonment in Florida is due to mandatory sentencing for drug offenders. But does that work? What about treatment? How can we enforce our laws without turning small offenders into career criminals? We are honored today with an excellent panel of experts to talk about this problem and what can be done about it. At present, we have Public Defender Larry Eager and Mary Ruiz, who is the president of the Manatee Glens Treatment Center, and Drug Court Coordinator Alfred James, who may arrive later today. After our presentations, we will have questions from the audience. At that point, please use the microphone for your question and state your name. So, without further ado.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There are some men here. My name is Larry Eager, and I am the elected public defender for the 12th Judicial Circuit. Just to give you a very brief background on who I am. The Public Defender's Office covers the 12th Judicial Circuit, which includes Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. And my responsibilities with the Public Defender's Office is that we represent all individuals who qualify for our representation, who have been accused of a criminal offense and are looking at potential jail sentences. And that covers a rather wide range of people. I would guesstimate that last year we represented photographic opportunity here. The last, I gotta tell you, this is not the format that I thought I was just gonna sit here and talk to you all about the Public Defender's Office. I didn't realize I was gonna have cameras and judges and other dignitaries listening to this conversation. All of you are dignitaries, I appreciate that. But the cameras are certainly something that I was not anticipating. As I said, the public defenders, last year we represented approximately 30,000 cases. Now, again, that covers the entire gamut from traffic offenses all the way to capital murder. So you can imagine that, and everything in between. So that's why we had so many cases. But we're here today to talk about drug offenses and the impact that the drug problem, for lack of better choice of words, impacts the criminal justice system. And I can say in a nutshell, it's bankrupting the criminal justice system. We have, and when we talk about drug abuse, we like to think of cocaine or heroin, but remember, drug abuse also includes, and a large portion of our caseload is alcohol related. So all of these things are encompassed within the criminal justice system. And it's almost impossible to give you an exact percentage of what cases we have deal with drugs, because oftentimes drugs might be the cause of the primary offense, but not the offense itself. Many of our burglaries, robberies, crimes of violence are oftentimes the result of drug abuse. So you have to encompass those into the number of cases. So it's easy to say at least 50% of our caseload relates one way or another to drugs and their abuse. So how do we approach this, and how do we deal with this problem? And you know, I look at this on a two-prong attack. I look at public safety as an issue, and the other issue is fiscal responsibility as to how we address this problem. Now, we can go into a debate as to whether or not drugs should be legal or illegal, whether it's a criminal justice matter or whether it's a public health issue. But within our office, we have to deal with the hand we're dealt. and it's a criminal justice issue. So the question is, are we really approaching this problem utilizing best practices with the objective of stemming the tide or altering the drug problem? There are a number of programs, and we have representatives from Drug Court and we have representatives from Manatee Glens that can tell you some of the programs that have been initiated in order to address the drug problem. But the traditional way of doing things is this: you break the law, you're confronted with the accusation. If you're found guilty of the accusation, you're punished, period. The objective, we hope to think that punishment would somehow alter the behavior of the person and it would stop that behavior. But that ain't working so well for us so far. So we have initiated a number of programs with the hope of stemming that tide. One of the first programs that we initiated, and the longest running program, would be Drug Court. The objective is to identify certain people who have fallen into the criminal justice system, and the objective is to divert them away from the criminal justice system into a separate court system with the hope that they'll receive treatment so that they'll no longer be a burden to the system and they'll have an opportunity for purposes of treatment and rehabilitation. I would say overall, for the target group that we have directed this program towards, it's been very successful. As the public defender, I can tell you I have great disappointment in the program. And the disappointment comes from the fact that we have not been as inclusive as we should be. We limit the people who go into drug court. And I can tell you time and time again the number of clients that I have who are desperately in need of assistance, who want help, but are denied it because primarily their prior criminal history. Or, as I said before, the primary offense wasn't a drug-related offense, but was a burglary or a robbery or something of that nature. And they are systematically excluded from the program. And I would say to you all, these are the people who are most in need of the program. So that's a debate that goes on, and drug court exists through the cooperation of the courts, the state's attorney's office, and the public defender's office. And if any one party decides to withdraw their support or not have a specific targeted group in that program, they're not included in the program. And I guess I can, I don't want to bore you with anecdotal tales, but I'll give you a prime example. I was at First Appearances a few weeks ago, and a young man was there on a charge of possession of paraphernalia. Paraphernalia is the device that he was using to smoke crack cocaine. And this was in the Salvation Army bathroom. So he was arrested for that charge. It was clear that he had a problem. The possession of paraphernalia is a lower level misdemeanor charge which doesn't carry a very long jail sentence. It's not a crime that would be facing a prison sentence, but a county jail sentence. So we could easily just take care of the case by pleading him out to jail and be done with it. The state was looking for a rather lengthy county jail sentence on the offense because he had just been released from prison. He had just served 5 years in Florida State Prison. When I asked the young man, do you want help? His obvious answer was yes. He had just been released from prison. He was a drug addict when he came in. He was a drug addict when he came out. Unfortunately, because the offense that wound him up in prison was a robbery charge, it precluded him from entry into the drug court program. So therein lies my frustration. So I look to find people like yourselves to tell your legislatures and your county, your state's attorney and judges, these are the people who need to be in drug court. The other programs that we've initiated within the system would be, we have mental health supervised release, because if you look at the situation that we're confronted with, and Mary Ruiz will obviously go into greater detail with this program, and various programs through Manatee Glens, a vast number of those people who are involved in drug abuse suffer from mental illness. Oftentimes they are self-medicating themselves. So identifying and helping those with mental illness can also divert people away from the criminal justice system with great success, actually. We also have DUI court for those who have multiple offenses on DUI cases so that they too can receive treatment. And instead of getting lengthy prison sentences, they will still be facing a prison sentence or a jail sentence, but in lieu of just jail and release, there is treatment involved, extensive treatment involved. Another program that has been recently initiated in the 12th Circuit is the Courts Assisting Veterans Program. And this is a program that identifies, at the time of arrest, individuals who are veterans, who are caught up in the criminal justice system. And again, you're finding a number of these people who suffer from mental illness, for instance, post-traumatic stress, traumatic head injury, and are also involved in drugs and self-medicating. So, we look at what the collateral damages are for what well, I'm kind of skipping around here, I apologize. In many ways, our hands are tied in the treatment of drugs because of the sentencing guidelines which prohibit people being diverted from the criminal justice system into treatment because of the nature of the offense that they've committed. Therein lies one of the main problems we have. The other problems we have are things involving minimum mandatory sentences, especially when we're dealing with the pharmaceutical drug problem, because a relatively small amount of these drugs dictates a mandatory prison sentence, regardless of your prior criminal history. So we have that to encounter. So the Public Defenders Association, of which I am a member, which includes the 20 elected public defenders, have lobbied long and hard before the Florida legislature to reevaluate our drug laws themselves with the hopes of reducing the penalties and reducing the crimes and requiring that treatment be part of the sanction that would be imposed on these individuals who are caught up in the criminal justice system itself. As I said, the costs are astronomical. And the costs are astronomical because of involving yourself in the criminal justice system usually leads to a conviction on your record, which precludes you from many job opportunities, educational opportunities. You are disenfranchised from your family and friends. When you are incarcerated, you're taken away from your family. So those costs are, as I said, become astronomical. Just as important is the cost to the taxpayer, the cost of incarceration. And unfortunately, one of the things that has been dramatically cut back within the prison system itself is any kind of treatment. So what you do is you do your time, you're released, you're given $100 and a bus ticket, and that's your future. And you're supposed to make it on your own, so to speak. So, I know we've come here to talk about the wonderful programs that we have, and I guess that we're going to leave that to James and Mary to talk about the programs that are involved and their successes. But with their successes, I unfortunately see too many failures. And there are opportunities there to make a significant difference. I think that based upon, we see the entire criminal justice system, the costs of incarceration, the idea that we have to find more ways of cutting costs. There's questions of privatization of prison systems, whatever. But we realize we cannot incarcerate our way out of these problems. And so with that, I'm going to lateral this off because I've been going on probably too long, to Mary Ruiz. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Manatee Glens is a specialty hospital and outpatient practice for mental health and addictions. We've been around since 1955, which makes us just a little more than half as old as the Braden Women's Club that we're currently enjoying this time together. The disorders that we treat are not rare. We serve 1 out of every 30 families in Manatee County. That includes 12,000 people a year. 3,500 of these are children and teens. Manatee Glens, if we truly were meeting the entire need of our community, we'd be serving 1 out of every 10 families. So we have an issue that's very common, that's very likely to affect my family, yours, or a loved one's. life. So it's something we should all be interested in. We're very fortunate in this community because we do have treatment. Manatee Glens offers inpatient detox through the generous funding of the county for those who do not have an ability to pay or don't have insurance. We also offer outpatient detox. The first ambulatory detox in the state of Florida was opened here in Manatee County. And this is a wonderful option for people who have responsibilities, maybe their children at home, they need to work. They can come and receive their detox services and still meet some of the obligations that they have in their lives. We have a private residential treatment facility, the classic 28-day facility. We offer scholarships to parents putting kids at risk. Manatee Glens also does child abuse and neglect services with the Save Children Coalition. The number one reason that parents cannot raise their kids is because of their own alcohol and drug abuse. Children are being removed from their homes now because their parents are hooked on OxyContin. The neonatal intensive care unit at Manatee Memorial, almost all the babies there are detoxing from an opioid addiction. It's very distressing to the nurses to hear those children cry because it's inconsolable. We know that alcohol and drug treatment requires a long period of intensive treatment. 18 months is what we like to see. So after detox and residential treatment, we offer intensive outpatient. That might be 3 groups and an individual a week, both for teens and adults. And then something we call aftercare, where you're still in touch with us, you're still able to come to us if there are relapses or concerns that you have. What is addiction? Everybody has their theories, but we keep forgetting what we know. There is a science to this. There is a medicine to this. And although I'm not a scientist and I'm not a doctor, I'm going to try and put in layman's terms what addiction is. It's a brain disorder. It's a physical process where your brain malfunctions when exposed to alcohol and drugs, or gambling, or sex addiction. I mean, that process isn't very different from addiction to addiction, which is why you see people sometimes stop drinking alcohol, start using drugs, stop using drugs, start a sexual addiction. You know, that brain is just trying to keep that progressive addiction going. That's why can some people drink or drug recreationally and others can't? They become progressively sickened by the process. Part of it is genetic. If your parent was an alcohol or drug addict, you have a 50% chance of becoming one, just by the sheer genetics. But it's also environmental, because when you have 2 identical twins, whether they're raised together or separately, they only have a 50% chance of acquiring an addiction disorder. So part of it's genetic, part of it's environmental. What happens in an addiction is your brain is hijacked. You're not in control anymore, but you think you are. You think you can limit your drinking, you think you can limit your drugging, you think you can make a deal with this disease, and you keep using because of that illusion. It's progressive. It gets worse without treatment. It always gets worse without treatment. It always gets worse without recovery. And it can't be cured, but it can be treated. We can't cure diabetes, but it can be treated. We can't cure asthma, but it can be treated. We can't cure arthritis, but it can be treated. So this is a chronic disease, like many chronic diseases. But we don't treat it like that. We treat it like if we lay hands on these people and they get their detox and they get their 28 days, somehow we're going to be disappointed in those people if they don't magically recover. Do we think a diabetic's going to recover after a hospitalization? No, we think they're going to have to manage that disease for the rest. that you have to commit to recovery for the rest of your life. Average age that the kids tell us they start using, now these are kids who are in serious trouble, or they wouldn't be at Manatee Glens trying to get treatment. 9 years old. Where did they get their first drink? Mom and dad or grandma and grandpa's liquor cabinet. So run home and put a lock on that liquor because the kids know where it is and they're waiting for you to leave the house so they can try it. What happens with a young brain exposed to the assault of those substances is a much more rapid progression of the disorder. So the earlier you start drinking and drugging, the worse it's going to be for you in terms of the progression of your disease. So when people tell me, well, I'd rather them drink at home, then I can teach them how to drink. How much brain damage is acceptable in the teenage brain? None. None. When is the teenage brain complete with its neurological development? Age 25. There is a reason those rental cars don't let people under 25 drink. Your brain is not complete. You're still learning, you're still growing. Those neurons are still changing. So prevention is really important. We cannot send a mixed message to kids and say, okay, it's okay to drink at home, or it's only beer, or it's only pot. Your brain doesn't know the difference. It's getting hijacked. So let's talk about recovery, because that's really the subject today, is what does science tell us about what we should be doing with the 1 out of 8 Americans, possibly 1 out of 10, who have alcohol and drug disorders. What we're doing now is we're putting them in jail and prison. 1 out of every 100 Americans is in jail today. That's more than Soviet Russia. So I agree with Larry Eager, we cannot arrest and incarcerate our way out of this problem, but we seem to be trying. And I think what makes it most hurtful is that by incarcerating people, we have criminalized a medical disorder. We jail the diabetics because they had a piece of cake. We put the asthmatics in jail because they didn't use their inhaler every day. That's really what we're doing when you look at it just at the raw science, at the raw genetic level. So recovery. The first 6 months are very difficult, especially the longer that you have been using. Your brain has been hijacked and it's not functioning correctly. So it's hard for you to take in the information of what you need to do to prevent relapse, to continue your recovery, your cognitive functions, your judgment. They're impaired by this progressive disease. So the first 6 months should be a place of very intensive and ongoing treatment. We like to see people in treatment up to 18 months. If you make it 18 months, you're well established in recovery. Now here's the wonderful thing about treatment. It works whether you want it or not. That's why we love Alfred James and his alcohol, DUI courts and his drug courts. If the judge says, son, I'm going to test you, and if I find drugs in your system, you're going to spend the weekend in jail. We love that as treatment providers because there's a consequence. There's a reinforcement for good behavior and working in your recovery. Now, is that contradictory? Well, we don't want to incarcerate them, we want to treat them. There have to be consequences, which is why families can be the worst offenders in perpetuating an alcohol and drug addiction in a loved one because they keep trying to protect them. They hide the thefts, bail them out of jail, give them money to live on. And so what that does is perpetuate the addiction and allow for the consequences to get more and more serious. Sometimes arrest will be the first time a family will have an opportunity to say, this is what we're willing to do. We're willing to pay for treatment. We're not willing to give you any other money. You can't live at home unless you are in treatment. The brain can now be seen through these MRI techniques. and the brain of a cocaine addict or a marijuana user or an alcoholic, pick your drug of choice, or an OxyContin addict, doesn't look the same. And if you present that person with a picture of cocaine or an OxyContin pill or a drink of alcohol, their brain fires up as if they're actually using. That's why somebody who gambles can be triggered just by talking about gambling or seeing a deck of cards. So the brain is very powerful, and I think that we pay a high price for the way that we choose to approach this illness. We cannot write off 8 to 10% of all Americans, which is what we're trying to do with our current criminal justice policies. We're going to write off 8 to 10% of Americans, and I'll promise you this, there's somebody for everybody in this room that is included in that number. Someone you love, someone you care about, someone you're related to, somebody you raised, somebody you're married to, somebody in your extended family. And so it affects all of us, and I think that we need more enlightened public policy. I think we forget our brain science when we go to look at things like mandatory sentencing. 5 years in jail, shouldn't you be cured? You haven't used, hopefully. That's not how the disease works. You need treatment. And the beautiful thing about cognitive therapy, talking therapy, is that it can change the brain back. Not all the way, but it can change the brain back. Abstinence can change the brain back. Talking therapy can change the brain back. Treating co-occurring mental illness can help with recovery. So we know what we need to do for these people. We're not doing it. And so Mr. Eager and Dr. James get to deal with the consequences of that. And Alfred, I think you're up next.
Good afternoon. I want to talk a little bit about drug court. Actually, Larry and Mary have actually said a lot about drug court. That is true. But I just want to begin by talking about drug court actually is something that began in Florida, in the state of Florida. Drug court began as a reaction to crack cocaine. The courts back in 1987, 86, somewhere in there, Miami had begun to be flooded with people who were on crack cocaine. They really didn't know what to do. So they began to create a different system within the courts to address it. And what they did was they found out that people really needed treatment more than they needed incarceration. But part of the process was short-term incarceration for use. Our drug court began in 1997. We have actually 2 drug courts in our circuit, so some of the things I talk about will be circuit-wide, some will be county-wide. I'll let you know about those. But drug court actually exists for 2 reasons from our perspective. We want to reduce drug abuse and the related criminal behavior. That's a combined situation there. But we also want to improve the lives of the individuals in drug court through vocational, social, and educational enhancement, because what a lot of people don't realize about drug court, people don't just come to us and get treatment. They're also provided with services that they may not get anywhere else, because we understand that if we treat a person, they get clean, they're still going to need other things in order not to get back into the system. So we also provide them with connections with agencies that can provide them with educational enhancement, with vocational opportunities. And then for a lot of our participants, we connect them with other agencies that can just help them to get over some of the hurdles in life that they've gone through, maybe some trauma, some childhood stuff, and in fact, reunite some families, because drug court serves a wide variety of people. Larry mentioned that he'd like to see drug court expanded to reach people who have more serious crimes. That is actually the direction most drug courts are headed, because most drug courts are realizing, and most circuits are realizing, that a lot of the people who have some of the real issues, who keep coming back and going into the system, are those people who may have a burglary of a dwelling, which right now our drug court would not allow a person to come in if it was an occupied dwelling. We do allow burglaries of conveyance cars and unoccupied, but of a dwelling it would not come in. If a person is a drug dealer, we don't allow them in the drug court as well. Now, I will say this, what we do quite often is we'll look at the circumstances surrounding that arrest, and if it's determined, because you can pretty much tell a drug dealer who lives off the drugs they sell, as opposed to someone who may be a drug user who's been caught up in a deal somewhere. And we'll try to ferret out those types of cases, but primarily if you have a drug dealing charge, or you have some type of what we call a violent charge, which includes that burglary of a dwelling, you can't get into drug court. Drug court primarily deals with people who have felonies. We do accept some misdemeanors, but primarily we deal with felonies. One of the reasons that drug court exists is because approximately a third of all arrests in our circuit are drug related, and probably upwards to 3/4 of the people who are arrested are under the influence of either alcohol or drugs at some type or some level. And so we see that substance abuse is a real big factor in the whole criminal activity and behavior of the individuals. Now, let me say something. Drug court isn't 100% effective, so we need not sit up here and pretend that it is. It isn't. But our drug court has a pretty good success rate for those who complete the program. Now, that being said, I think I need to clarify that whole process. Right now, about 74% of the people who come into drug court complete the program. And out of that number, about 84% don't get rearrested within an 18-month period. We track people's rearrest for 18 months after they're out of the program. We can't call them in and test them for their urine because they've completed the legal component of the program. So what we do is we look for the old behaviors that got them in the drug court in the first place. And generally that means they're going to be rearrested somewhere down the line, because a lot of the people that we deal with, the behavior just goes hand in hand with the substance abuse. And I agree with Larry, a lot of the arrests we see in the newspaper, these burglaries and these petty thefts, and a lot of these types of charges actually are people who are trying to get drugs. They're trying to get drugs. That's why it's real important to lock your cars at night, because people actually roam the neighborhoods. If you park your car in the driveway, or you park on the street, they're just testing your doors, see if they're open. They're probably not going to get a Slim Jim and open it up, but they're just going to test your doors. And enough people leave their doors open so that many of these people can go through a neighborhood at night and get a pretty good amount of money. Since our drug courts have begun, circuit-wide, we served over 2,000 people, and out of that number, we've had over 1,400 graduates. Currently in Manatee County, we have 123 people in our drug court. I'd like to say something else, is that probably, because I'm going back, I'm going to give you a little history. Going back probably about 6 years ago, I would say the median age in drug court was probably around 35, 36. Right now it's in the 20s, because we are getting people in drug court who graduated from high school 2 weeks ago. And they're primarily coming in because of the prescription drug thing that's going on. And I think that prescription drugs, when it's all said and done, will make crack cocaine look like a walk in the park. There's one thing that happens with the prescription drugs that crack didn't do so much, and that was deaths. Last year, they stated that 1 out of 7 deaths in Florida was related to prescription drug abuse. Okay, so you can just do the numbers. And that age group which that involved was the 20 to 24 age group of people. So one of the things that we find now in drug court is that drug court has is really being challenged because, as I tell people, we're kind of on a learning curve because when we started getting a lot of people who have prescription med abuse, we were operating under a model that was dealing primarily with crack cocaine, marijuana, those types of drugs. It's a totally different drug, totally different effect on the individual. People who use prescription meds will go to events that are much, much worse than people who normally use cocaine, marijuana, those types of things. In addition to that, we also have another problem that we're dealing with in drug court. We have what they call designer drugs. Designer drugs have been around a while, but now we have different types of drugs which mimic like marijuana. You hear about K2, Spice, that type of stuff on the TV. We also have the bath salts, which have been criminalized, but just because you criminalize something doesn't mean that people don't get it. But what happened was you had chemists who were at some universities who studied drugs and their makeup, and they basically replicated these drugs in laboratories. And then they published papers, and then there were smart enough people around the world who took those same papers, and what they do is they'd add a molecule of oxygen here, a molecule of oxygen there, or a hydrogen. What that would do, that would change the molecular structure of the particular drug which was criminalized. Now it's not that same drug, but you get a similar effect, so guess what? It's not legal because it's not the same thing. So we're dealing with that. And along with that is that we aren't able to test for many of these drugs. And that's one of the beauties of drug court in Manatee County and Sarasota County is we have our own drug testing lab. We don't have to send it out anywhere. So if we're in court one day and we're concerned maybe somebody has used that day because maybe we're going to allow them to go out of town or go somewhere where it's work-related, and we want to make sure we can have them provide us with a sample, and within 15 minutes we can have a test back, which lets us know whether that person has used any drugs or not. So that's another thing we're facing right now is that there are drugs out there that we really can't test for. And there are other prescription drugs that people are abusing that don't get as much press as like the Oxycontin and the Loratabs, all those higher potency ones, but there are other drugs out there, muscle relaxants and things of that nature which people abuse. There are over-the-counter medication that people combine with certain other drugs and alcohol that we wouldn't be able to detect. So drug court's on a learning curve right now. What's the beauty of drug court? The beauty of drug court is that people are supervised probably more than they are anywhere else within the criminal justice systems. I think we supervise people more than people who are on probation, because most people in drug court are on probation. But what happens is they generally come in 3 times a week when they first get into the program to do groups. They're coming in a minimum of 3 times a week to be tested. We also provide random testing on weekends so that nobody just gets through the system without a weekend test, because we know that on the weekends that's when you're going to get most of your use if people are abstaining through the week. But when they first come in, they also come to court every week, and they talk to the judge. And part of that accountability helps get people at least to a place where they're beginning to function again. And as they move through the program, those requirements are lessened. There are 4 phases in the program. Phase 1 is when you come in those 3 times. Then phase 2, it goes down to 2, and you see your therapist every other week. Then phase 3, it goes back to like once a month. But at any time during the program, if we believe that the person's behavior is indicating that there may be some use, we can always up those requirements back to some other level. So drug court provides a lot of supervision, both judicially and also for the treatment aspect of the program. Mary mentioned that jail is a part of the sanction process. We do send people to jail if they use, not always. Sometimes we provide them with public service work depending on the circumstances. Sometimes this is small as writing a paper and reading it to some peers or to the court about a situation. So we try to work with individuals because, as Mary said, there is a science to this, but at the same time we're dealing with individuals, and because we're individuals, we respond differently sometimes to different catalysts, and that's what we attempt to do with the drug court process. One of the things that we really are proud of with drug court is that we've had 83 drug-free babies born in the circuit. And that's a real big one because those babies who are born addicted to drugs really cost a lot of money, and I believe that later on in society they play a role in the things that happen in our culture. I can't put my finger on it. I can't say that it is, but most of us in this room came up at a time when there was no such thing as an ADHD and ADD, but about the time right after the wave of crack babies were born and they got into the school system, we began to see a lot of that. I believe that some of that is connected because when a baby is developing, when that fetus is developing, there's certain changes that occur, and primarily to the brain. And I think the brain is the place that we really got to begin to look at when during the treatment process, because that's what gives us most of our answers about addiction, is the brain, because that's the thing that's affected most. And a lot of the brain research is coming out now, and so we're trying to utilize a lot of that so that we can put in some practices that will help us to get people back on track. But as I said earlier, we exist to reduce that criminal behavior, but we also exist to help people get their lives back in order through vocational education and social enhancements, and pretty much drug court in a nutshell.